Hey everyone, this is MLAT TV. I'm Keith Robinson. This is part two, conversation with Dr. Janet Bastiman on top tips for delivering Agile Data Science in a distributed world. So if you haven't already, go back and watch part one. But this works as standalone, so feel free to carry on. If you haven't already, hit subscribe to get more data-driven content straight into your inbox. It's a really interesting conversation with Janet. She's highly experienced, one of the top data science leaders in the UK. She's got over 20 years experience at the very top of industry. So she's got some really practical top tips for you in this difficult time. So enjoy, watch the end, hit subscribe, and I'll see you real soon. The Black Swan moment of this, how are you thinking about your models at the moment?
Yeah, that's a really interesting one because you always see blips and most models will smooth out the blips. However, this isn't like an increase in retail at Christmas. The spending that's gone on at the supermarkets, for example, is far in excess of what they'd normally see over the Christmas period. Yeah. It is completely unseasonable. So any models that they're basing purchasing certain products on or how regularly people buy them are going to be all over the place for months. That said, depending on what you're trying to do with your models, you may want to include it or completely exclude it. So you could look at, let's say we could ignore pretty much the entire first quarter of this year and just look at the 2019 figures for sales and how things are moving, because the things that would have affected sales in 2020 are pretty similar to what would have affected sales in 2019. So if you look at weather patterns have been the same, so what people might have eaten and what clothes they'd have bought and how frequently they'd have bought cars, this event aside would have probably tracked with a plus or minus a percent 2019. So that would be one way of dealing with it. You could just ignore this blip or mathematically adjust it. The other alternative is just build it in, and build it in with the triggers that when there is a major event, a major disaster, this is the behavior that we expect to see, and have that so that should something like this happen again, I mean, this is the first time we've seen things on this scale for a very long time, but there have been smaller versions of this. If you go back to SARS and MARS and things like that, similar sort of patterns were seen, they were just a lot more isolated. So having the information as to how human behavior changes in these events would be really useful. So let's say you had a model based on all of this, and in January, you could see how things were changing and predict, okay, this appears to be a very similar event. Let's start adjusting our manufacturing, our supply chains, our purchasing, everything else, so that we have the right things in the right places at the right time for the people that need them. So I think there's definitely benefit for modeling the now, as well as modeling what we would have been in a almost alternate universe where this didn't happen.
So what you're saying there is we can use this training data to create some triggers in the system. So when if maybe probably will happen again, we can then potentially automate the adjustments that need to be made to cope with the next crisis. And I guess the follow-on point from that is looking at the next couple of months and looking at what data points do we need to be looking at for when there is start to be an upturn and return to normality, so we can then set the triggers of when we need to be thinking about normality.
Yes. I think it's understanding the return to normality is going to be tricky, because one of the problems with the predictions of how things are going is there are so many unknowns, and the uncertainty in all of the epidemiological models of how things are changing means it's a practical impossibility to put dates on things right now. Even when you look at some of the countries that we thought were coming out and starting to relax the rules, so China's starting to see a few increases in infections and deaths again. So I think caution is the way forward. We have I think we need to look at least a few months of business as it is right now. So in terms of people are going to be working from home, so transport is going to be reduced. Essential supplies are still going to need to be run, so all of our wonderful essential services are still going to need to go. But I don't think we need to start looking at ramping up anything that's not essential right now. I think it's going to be really difficult for businesses that deal in luxuries. So like the clothing industry, for example, I mean, we're not going out anywhere, so people aren't going to be buying all those new clothes unless they suddenly become essential. So those sorts of businesses are going to need to almost, I mean, they'll have ordered 12 months in advance. So what is going to happen to that stock? It's already being produced, it's already coming, it might already be sat in warehouses. So they're going to need to think about doing something with that. But in terms of modelling the rest of going forward, I would say model now for at least the next 3 months. And we will probably start to see other countries that had lockdown before us starting to come out. That would be our trigger to start modelling what we need to do to bring us out. So I mean, I think we're probably 2 to 4 weeks behind some of the other countries. So that should give us enough of a time to start changing things around. But until then, it's going to be very, very difficult.
Yeah, it's really, really good advice. Yeah, it's obviously crazy and unprecedented times, which is also fascinating from a data perspective, but how data plays a role in all this and what we'll learn in retrospective from the data and all of this, I think.
Yes. I mean, there are a lot. So there's been calls to action from the Turing Institute asking for data scientists to help out with some of the predictive modelling of sort of the progression of the disease and how it's going. There will be an immense amount of data in maybe 3 to 6 months that we can analyse in terms of human behaviour, how things changed. Could we predict the disease spread based on people's purchasing habits? So even before areas went on lockdown, did we see people realising that they were going to go on lockdown and buying things? Could that have triggered other decisions? How was that correlated to sort of the expert advice? I mean, we saw as in this country, as we were saying, you know, please enforce social distancing, please stay at home. We were still seeing people go out on sunny weekends and congregate en masse in beauty spots and on beaches, even in this country. So people weren't necessarily listening to the advice. So understanding how maybe that communication could have been done, could we have done things differently? Not from a pointing fingers point of view, but just so we can understand and do better next time.
Yeah. Related to that, not quite relevant to the topic we were discussing initially, but how do you think about data privacy in that? So again, just from what I've heard, I haven't been reading lots on news, etc., but I have heard on podcasts about how big tech, Facebook, Google, you know, potentially the data they've got on our phones about our movements is potentially going to be very valuable in everything you've just said. How are you thinking about data privacy? Do we have should we be giving that up freely for the good of the population, or do we still need to be holding on to data?
My personal view on this is that there should always be a choice. And by default, that should be not given up freely. That should be for the person to decide. However, if you can clearly state the benefits, then most reasonable people would volunteer that information, but it always has to be a choice. So if you say, look, your phone has your movement data, it shows where you've been, how long you were there, what you were doing. Can we have access to this? Because if we get enough people's movement data and we can correlate that with how we saw disease spread, it will give us a much better model for next time. I think most reasonable people would agree to that. But it always has to be an opt-in. There was a great experiment that Hannah Fry, the mathematician, did a few years ago, pandemic for the BBC, where she got people to opt in to this, and they basically modelled a disease. I believe it was around Hastings, and used an app on the phone to see how people were going, and then predict the spread of the disease based on that. So we could do the same thing, and it would be amazing, but it 100% has to be an opt-in, because as soon as you go down the slope of just taking people's data, it's very hard to go back from that.
Yeah, you wouldn't go down the road of sort of nudge theory of sort of default opt-in and then have to opt out. That's not the...
No, I have been arguing with people for at least the past 20 years that you should always have to consciously opt in to these things. It should never be one of these sneaky, tick this box or opt out. It should be a 100% informed choice to opt in. And as long as you can clearly say what you're doing with the data and why, then people are usually, yeah, that sounds fair, I'll join in with that.
Yeah, and I think that may be a debate that comes out of this over the coming years, that is sort of shines a light on data privacy, and it gives a different angle to think about this, rather than just down the advertising angle of, do we want to give up our data for advertising? It's, you know, when this happens again, are we comfortable giving our data so we can be better prepared and save more lives? Which most people will say yes. And then it's a case of, you know, how do we trust Google and Facebook and Amazon with even more personal health data potentially, etc., and how is that managed is a big question. But I think that's an interesting discussion.
Yeah, that would be a very, very big question for I think a lot of people to debate over a long time before I guess a decision.
So the last question I had, Jen, I guess relates to all of that. It's my third point when we set out was just on prioritisation at the moment. How are you thinking about estimation and prioritising, mainly around sort of value? What's adding value at the moment? Because obviously the how quickly everything's moving. How are you thinking about short-term versus long-term for data science projects? Or has nothing changed in your world because your company isn't affected? What's the...
Again, I think I'm really lucky here because very little has changed. We've always had a really good balance between long-term objectives and sort of short-term iterative improvements for the things that we produce. So we'd planned out up until the end of March just in terms of concepts that we wanted to do. 2.5 weeks ago, when we all started working from home, we were just about to start a sprint. We knew what we were doing, so that's fine. And I've just finished planning sort of the next couple of weeks and kind of what we're planning on doing a few weeks after that. And again, it's just, there's about 25% just long-term objectives that we're just picking away at, and the rest of it is just things that we'd looked at, we knew what we were doing. The estimation is pretty easy because we've been working in this way for years, so we can look at a task and we can instantly break that down into the data side will take this long, sort of cleaning and management will take this long, an initial prototype, improving that prototype, packaging that up in a container and deploying it. So yeah, I'm quite lucky. It's business as usual for me. I think if you're in a situation where your planning has been more face-to-face meetings, you know, the half day, everyone around a whiteboard, and you've never done anything remotely, you might be finding this sort of time challenging. There's software out there for virtual whiteboarding, you can screen share, draw in whatever you need, even just a shared online document, just so that everyone can talk about the same thing at the same time. But you can do your estimation in a very similar way in terms of making sure that everyone's talking. This goes back to the over communicating piece, making sure that your team's involved, talking about the task, making sure everyone understands it, so that when it comes to estimating how long it's going to take, everyone is in agreement and you can pick up on that and move forward. And if you're only just starting doing that, the first few times can be quite painful. It can take a lot of time and it can feel like a huge overhead. But as your team gets used to it, it can be very quick, and you'll end up with maybe half a day. You work out what tasks you're going to do in the next sprint, get them estimated. Everyone knows what every task is, so they can just pick the next one off the list and you can zap through them as a team.
Yeah. I'm not sure there's a good answer to this, but I'm going to pose the question anyway. If you're a head of data science in a business that's been hugely affected by this, and there is real short-term pressure on trying to keep the lights on, and you're overseeing a expensive data science function, and the thinking now is, how can we help in the short term to keep the lights on? How can we use our skills to look at the data to understand where to best to put resources or not put resources, versus our longer term objectives that we set and planned out? How would you think about that? Do you just dive straight into all short term, or how would you pitch that to the business about managing short and long term?
Okay, well, if you're in the sort of business where you've got a keeping the lights on problem, then as head of data science, you should be working with all of your peers for this. And as a company, you need to be setting your short-term objectives. And as soon as you get to a keep the lights on situation, it's a question of looking at the skill sets of your entire business and working out where the best place to be is. Now, if you've got data scientists who can create proper production worthy code, and your production team needs help because they're just firefighting bugs, say pause on the data science for a month, help them out, because no one's going to get anything done if you've got pain in the business. So you'd have to look at things a little bit more holistically.
Yeah.
Just the same as if I'm struggling and I need resources from engineering, I'll grab them. It needs to go both ways.
Yeah.
So that would be the first thing. The second thing is, if there is scope and the data to work out, for the team to work out where things could best be done in order to add value, in order to fix things, then 100% do that. And again, drop the longer term goals, because the business needs to survive. So as a team and as a leader, you need to look at what the business needs. And if that means delaying a longer term project by a couple of months, then that's the right thing to do.
Yeah, great. So the 2 points you made there were you're breaking down barriers, increasing flexibility on the workforce to make sure key priorities are met, and set the short-term priorities and have that communicated from a wider business level, and all hands to the deck on those.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it may be that the data team can't help. And in that case, then fine, carry on with what you planned, but keep that ear to the ground. Again, break down the barriers and make sure that you're there, so that should that situation change, you can dive in and help.
Hey everyone, me again. Thanks for watching to the end. Hope you enjoyed it. Some really interesting points there with me and Janet. I know you've subscribed already, so please like or share. Stay tuned for more data-driven content coming straight to your inbox. Thank you.